All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded. May I have a roll call?
Dr. Aguilar?
Here.
Brent? Here. Freeman? Here. Dessler?
Here.
Schultz?
Here.
Thank you. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders past, present, and future who call this place Anascoyo, the land that Isla Vista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue the tradition of coming together and growing as communities. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Now I'd like to move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion on this consent agenda or any items any directors would like to pull?
I'll move to approve consent agenda.
I'll second.
All right, we have the motion by Brandt and any second by Schultz. Is there any public comment on this motion? I see none, so I will go to a vote. All those who are in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, please say no. And this motion passes 6-0-0-1. Now I'd like to move on to the public comment period. At this time, any member of the public may speak on matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board of directors that are not on the agenda. The board will not take action on any item not on the agenda except as provided by law. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, I don't see any public comments, so I'll move into our discussion and action items. We have item 4.1, the 2024 Halloween report out.
Turn it over to Maya to present on what we did this year. That's what we're focusing on today.
Hi everyone, good to see you all. Welcome to our Halloween recap. We did an event called Noche de Ofrendas, Day of the Dead Arts Festival and Night Market, which essentially means Night of Offerings. So I'll be just going over what we did from engagement all the way from community involvement to media. So a little event overview. We had a nightlife alternative event filled with artistic and cultural experiences. Our event featured BIPOC artists, live painting, interactive art exhibits, danza, a Day of the Dead community altar, live music, and thrift fairs. So there was a whole bunch of fun things going on. First, I'm going to talk about the art festival and kind of what that meant and what it entailed. So we had 5 live painters, 20 artist booths, a community canvas where anyone could come and paint, and a garment upcycle station for wearable art. So if people brought clothes or if maybe they got something that they wanted to upcycle, there was a place to do it. We had a doodle table. You can see our featured artist. That's the person who did all of our graphics and provided art for the Day of the Dead exhibit as well. This is one of our live painters. This is actually a really exciting moment. I've seen their work in exhibits, so it was really cool to watch them live paint as well. Next slide. We also featured a local group for a danza ritual. This was an interactive ritual with Tolteca Izcatl that both educated the community on the type of ritual practices that are celebrated around Day of the Dead in the indigenous communities, and it was also an interactive experience. So in the end, community members are actually able to participate and learn the ritual and show gratitude, and it was a really beautiful thing to be a part of. Next, we had our Day of the Dead community altar. So event attendees were encouraged to bring photos of their loved one to contribute to our community altar. We provided frames for people if they just brought a photo and they wanted to frame them. And we also had skulls that were like little tiny skulls that people could paint. We also had a little bit of information about what an altar is, what it means to different communities, and how these offerings all play a role in the larger cultural significance of Day of the Dead. And of course, a little bit of fun. We had some live music and local DJs. We only had one live band, but we had DJs playing throughout the evening as well. And then we also had thrifting vendors and community partners. So in total, we had about over 50 different booths, from thrifters to even having voter registration there and present. Community members of all walks of life came together to share their different offerings, whether it was tarot card readings, jewelry, information about basic needs on campus. We had a little bit of everything to offer. Following the event, we did see really good media engagement. We were featured on KEYT for our Halloween, for our efforts in contributing to a safer Halloween this year. We were able to even provide additional exposure to our local BIPOC community and what offerings they were able to provide. So we even got to share footage of the different rituals. So I think it had an even bigger impact than just our community, which I thought was really powerful. I kept it pretty short and sweet. So in summary, achievements, we had some really great engagement with the Indigenous community. We had over 50 community partners involved. We had about 500 attendees, and we had a really great exposure for a lot of local BIPOC artists in our art gallery that we featured in the community center. Learning opportunities, I would say that I noticed attendance drastically decreased by around 9 p.m., which is a little bit different than I was expecting, but I think this weekend a lot of people were out and about, and I don't know that they were necessarily seeking out maybe like thrifting or an artistic experience. However, I do think that it was still very valuable. That being said, thrift vendors saw a lot less success and monetary value than I think that they did during day events. So I would suggest next year, if we do want to continue something like this, really honing in on the arts and the rituals and the altar and that community aspect, and maybe not doing the night market aspect. Yeah, that is our event. I will open it up to any questions or comments or feedback that you have.
All right, thank you for that report. Any questions from any directors? Yes, Director Brand.
Well, first off, incredible event. It's really cool to see it come to life in your presentation. And I didn't get to make it out there, but I got to see the tail end of it from across the street. Just in general, are we getting feedback from bands and performing artists about how they like the space, how it works for them? How's that going?
I think it's going really well. I feel like this event, I would say that I think the band was maybe expecting a bit of a larger crowd. I think we were kind of expecting one as well, given that it's our first time experimenting in like a night larger event. We normally do these during the day. But in general, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from bands. We're actually going to restart our groove nights by popular demand. A lot of people were requesting it. So I know that bands really like it as a rehearsal space. I haven't seen a lot of people take advantage of the community center as an event venue, like a concert space yet. So I think that there's still more work to be done there.
Well, it sounds like you've already targeted this as a great opportunity. So really cool to hear that we're trying to do more of this sort of stuff.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify and ask, this was October 25th, that Friday?
The 19th,
The 19th.
actually. So it was quite early.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Well, I will now open this item up for any public comment or question at this time. Yes.
On the public boots on the ground view of this, that weekend was the weekend before the ordinance kicks in. So there was a lot of other Halloween events going on, parties mainly. The good thing was none of them were pay to play. None of them were, except maybe Hammer House, but that's debatable. But regardless, there was a lot of other events going on. So you were in competition with unsanctioned parties versus a sanctioned event. Where do you think people are going to go to drink and stuff like that? Which, you know, we know what the answer to that is. We don't even have to ask that question. It was a great event. I went. I stopped by. It was really cool. The thing about the bands, you have Goon Incorporated doing a show on the 22nd there next week at the community center. So the community center is seeing a usage mostly by DJs and things like that. Bands, they're usually saving it up for either parties or they're saving it up for Woodstocks. So I don't know if relying on bands in the future at nighttime is a good idea, but maybe in the daytime, when you have daytime events. It's a funny thing because you had the Fix It Utopia thing the other day, and there was performers that performed, but everybody kept asking, why don't they have any bands? You had solo performers doing it. They sounded great, don't get me wrong, I'm not bragging on that. But everybody was asking me about where are the bands? And that's maybe a venue where bands would, not venue, but a time. It's a time issue. Nighttime, they're saving it up for other things. So, but in all, it was a great event. I loved it. And do it again. I'll be there.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're the one that did all the work. I just
I
showed
will
up.
say, I completely agree with you, though. That was something that I was also thinking. And I don't think that necessarily next year I want to think about it as like competing against those spaces, but I think it's about creating safe spaces for people searching for alternatives, which is why I kind of recommend, if we do continue something at night like this, shifting a little more away from like the market aspect and really honing into creating that safe space inside where people can participate in crafts and artistic things as well. But yeah, Utopia, I was expecting bands as well, so we're on the same page there.
See, I'm not crazy.
No, you're not. Not at all.
Well, I am crazy, but I'm not.
No. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for those comments. Is there any other public comments, Tom, or questions? I see none, so I'll come back to the board. If there's any further board commentary or discussion. Yes, Director Brand.
Like, do you think it's important to not just go by without declaring victory? Because this is the 9th year in a row that there has not been a big crowd during Halloween weekend, and that we have not seen the issues that we had seen in the past. We know that there's still some work to be done on the other weekends, but it's the things that we're doing on those other weekends, like this one, the 2 weeks out, 1 week out, that are, I think, gonna continue to make the difference. So thank you for your work on this. And I think that we have something that is starting to work right and make a difference in the places where we need to.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Maya, for all your hard work and making the event happen and putting something together for us to reflect on today. And now we can move on to item 4.2, the Isla Vista Community Mobility Plan.
Okay, well, I'll pass it over to Julie in a second, but I do want to recognize that we have two of our partners, Larry Blackerby from MTD. And I'm sorry I missed your name, but you're from the Food Co-op.
Yeah,
Who was a
sure.
partner on the mobility plan to get done, and we had just dozens of people work on this plan specifically over 4 years now. So it has 2020. So I'll turn it over to Julie Dixon, who's our consultant on getting this done.
Oh, looks like I don't have to share my screen, even better. So terrific. Can we go ahead and reshare that then?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was all prepared to share my screen. Good evening, everyone. Julie Dixon here with Dixon Resources Unlimited. I'm also joined by my colleague, Chisa, and tonight will be the first of 2 separate presentations, but this first one will be, again, as Jonathan mentioned, a summary of the Community Mobility Plan, which I know all of you really played an active role in, and just really excited about the momentum of this project along with the other, and really how engaged the community has been. So if we can go to the next slide. Just wanted to share really kind of that road and process that we've all been on as we've talked about this project. It has been a long time coming. So again, I just really want to recognize all of the efforts that have gone into everything from the tabling and the surveys and the town hall meetings over the last several years, and ultimately the pop-up events and the stakeholder engagement that really culminated in really the feedback that you're going to receive here today. Understanding that as we talk about the preferences and priorities of the community, we've tried to outline those and surmise those in today's presentation. There's a lot that goes into this, obviously, but ultimately seeking the adoption of the final mobility and park reports, understanding that not everyone has read these recommendations in detail. I highly recommend it. A lot of energy has been put into these documents, but I just wanted to make sure. I think that the road traveled is really a great example here of just how much engagement has gone into this. I do really want to make sure to not only recognize the board, but also staff, because a lot of this engagement, a lot of the tabling, a lot of the communication and connections with the community was as a direct result of just how engaged you all are with the community. And again, being a alumnus of the area, I'm just really proud to see you all continuing to carry that flag forward, and the amount of engagement that has occurred has just been really solid. So as we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the existing conditions and the community needs, which includes a summary of the top 5 existing conditions and top 5 needs per mode. So if we'll go to the next slide. So let's talk about the vehicle. Obviously, mobility is about much more than just the car, but I'm sure we can all really appreciate the number of vehicles that do impact Isla Vista. So in terms of those top 5 existing conditions, obviously the parked illegally vehicles being one of our biggest challenges, impeding access and ingress and egress from our sidewalks, our driveways, and our crosswalks. Also inhibiting access for public safety vehicles, including fire engines. The lack of parking wayfinding in Isla Vista was one of those existing conditions, as well as not having adequate drop-off and pickup spaces or designated carpool car sharing spaces as well. Very few loading zones exist on Pardall, which is why we see our delivery vehicles parking in the middle of the street and or double parking. And then all roads in Isla Vista have a posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour, with the exception of El Colegio, with the exclusion of right there outside of the elementary school. In terms of the top 5 needs assessed, enforcing the parking regulations to reduce illegal parking has a major impact on mobility and on safety. Trying to decrease our dependency on cars by promoting alternative modes of transportation and car sharing. Adding potential traffic calming measures for reduced speeds, especially along El Colegio, and improving those sight lines at intersections. This is something that, as a result of the daylighting ordinance that went into effect January 1 of this year and into enforcement January 1 of 2025, is something that is intended to help address that, where you have to park 20 foot back from the intersection. That is now a state vehicle code. And so that should also help further our improvement, but we need enforcement. And then designated drop-off and delivery zones, especially not only for our ride-hailing services, but also for our delivery services, including the recommendation for the need of short-term parking spaces, especially in and around the loop, so that people have spaces for those quick pickup and drop-offs. Next slide. So walking, in terms of those existing conditions, 42% of sidewalks are missing. That's 7.7 miles. Lack of stop signs at certain intersections create a significant safety hazard. Lack of adequate street lining, sidewalks that lack ADA compliance, cars parked partially on the curbs, obstructing pedestrians. I think many of us have seen that oftentimes our sidewalks just simply become more parking spaces. And in terms of the top 5 needs assessed, we need a complete sidewalk network, removed of obstructions and with ADA widths and accessibility considerations. We need paved crosswalk markings with flashing lights to alert drivers of pedestrian crossings. And we need stop signs, especially at 3-leg intersections, and to ultimately slow down our vehicles and bicycles when we talk about those locations. And again, improving those sight lines at the intersections to improve the pedestrian access and visibility of our pedestrians out there. Next slide. So in terms of our buses, again, grateful for MTD's participation, especially at some of the town hall meetings, because obviously it's very well known that MTD is slowly rebounding to the pre-pandemic levels. 5 bus routes by MTD do not meet student and worker demands for frequency of time and basically do not create the reliability that many need in order to be able to ride the bus. Typically, the bus stops lack ADA accessibility requirements as well as the need for lighting, seating, and shelter. And free transit is offered to students while reduced rates are offered to youth, seniors, and Medicare card holders and persons with disabilities. And MTD has planned the launch of the WAVE, a microtransit service connecting the Isla Vista Community Center with Amtrak and UCSB, as well as some of our more popular destinations in Goleta, including Trader Joe's, which that will be the one thing I will keep with me for the rest of my life is that everyone loves Trader Joe's that lives in Isla Vista. Top 5 needs assessed is more direct bus services to popular destinations near Isla Vista, more frequent bus services, including late night service. We know that we can't ask people to take the bus to work if they can't get home from work using said bus. We want to be sure that we increase our bike rack capacity on the buses and add basic amenities, improving accessibility at the bus stops, and actually adding more bus stops throughout the residential area to again make it more convenient for us to get on the bus. Next slide. So in terms of regional transport, for the 5 existing conditions, Isla Vista is currently served by the Goleta Amtrak station, as well as the Santa Barbara Amtrak station and Santa Barbara Airport for regional transit. And besides the car, Isla Vista primarily connects outside the county through train, bus, shuttles, and flights, but service levels may not necessarily be convenient. And ride-hailing services are most common mode to access Goleta Amtrak and the Santa Barbara Airport from Isla Vista. And we know that that's also been impacted over the years post-pandemic in terms of recovery and availability of those hailing services. The Amtrak via the Goleta station is the 3rd most common mode for trips taken outside of southern Santa Barbara County from Isla Vista. And there's no direct bus access available to either the Goleta or Santa Barbara Amtrak stations. I will highlight one thing I shared with my colleague Chisa. When I was in school there wasn't a Goleta Amtrak station, so I am quite envious, but we got to make sure that we can get people to that Amtrak station. Top 5 needs assessed is improved public transit connection points to be able to access the Amtrak stations as well as the airport and the Santa Barbara Airbus departure point, and improve information on how to make regional transit connections. So that is something that's important because few regional transit needs were identified during our community outreach other than those 2 points. So the promotion of it and availability will be key. Go ahead. Next slide. Cycling, the all-important bicycle. When we talk about the top 5 existing conditions, currently disconnected and lacking bike infrastructure, both in and connecting outside of Isla Vista, including wayfinding for regional bike connections. The Pardal Tunnel was identified as the most common bike path and connection point between Isla Vista and UCSB. And I see some typos on here, so apologies for that. And the lack of secure bike parking, especially private bike parking. This was something that we constantly heard in any of our community engagement was the lack of secure bike parking in our residential private locations, and that cyclists are both recreational and commuter, and then significant private bike ownership, but few bike services in comparison to UCSB and Santa Barbara. So a lot of people own bikes, but not a lot of services in support of those. Switching over on cycling to the top 5 needs assessed is add and upgrade to multi-use and dedicated bike lanes where applicable within Isla Vista, more bicycle racks and secure bike storage, the need for traffic calming for bikes and improved traffic signals and markings, improving regional cycling connections, and make pavement improvements. Nothing is worse than riding that bike and hitting one of those ruts. Next slide. So micromobility, as you all are aware, for our top 5 existing conditions, there are limited dedicated scooter bike corrals Scooters often park in the middle of the sidewalk or on the street, impacting ADA access. I want to highlight one thing here too, because I just really dug in on the daylighting vehicle code. In the vehicle code, it does allow for that 20-foot space at the intersections to be used for corrals for micromobility. So that's an important note when we talk about the outcomes. And that under the county's shared mobility device permits program, up to 300 scooters are allowed and restricted to Isla Vista, as they are not permitted in Goleta or in UCSB. And scooters, skateboards are not permitted on sidewalks. However, many ignore this. And there are no identified skateboard or scooter lanes. And most frequented scootered shared routes occur along Pardal, Abrego, Camino Pescadero, Del Playa, Embarcadero del Mar, and Del Norte. For the top 5 needs assessed, enforcing and governing scooter speed limits at night, conducting sobriety checks and disabling night riding, improving pavement conditions, again, just like those ruts on the bike, no fun in a bike, scooter, or on a skateboard. Improving street lighting, this will help increase safety for nighttime riding, and installing a secure skateboard racks outside of businesses to encourage the utilization of skateboards so the folks have places to put them and secure them, and considering installation of scooter parking corrals and/or zones. Next slide. So now what I'd like to do is review a summary of the recommendations. It's important to understand that the community's prioritization of these recommended initiatives is really the approach here. Some of these changes or recommendations will require further traffic engineering feasibility analysis, and not all initiatives per location may be compatible at the same time. So it's important when we talk about the priorities and the wants, it's important to think about the fact that some of this is going to need to be evaluated more, and to think about the cohesion of how some of them will or won't go together. Next slide.
If I can add, Julie, we didn't have funding to do any of that engineering analysis, so that's why I'll have to go next.
Yes, thank you for that. So in terms of policy, initiatives prioritized here is identify that scooter users are to use bike lanes and install signs, post educational materials, and enforce. What you'll also notice is that we included dollar signs as an indicator of lower cost versus higher cost value, with up to $3 signs being one of those higher cost thresholds as well, just to kind of give everyone kind of a palette of what this could look like in terms of dollars and cents. Next one is identify no parking along bike lanes, installing signage and enforcing this. Consider lowering the vehicle speed limit by 5 miles per hour overall within Isla Vista, and down to 25 miles per hour in front of Friendship Manor on El Colegio, and install speed feedback signs. Many of you who do drive have seen those feedback signs where when you're approaching it, it's demonstrating to you how fast you are going in order to encourage you to slow down. The next one was reduce scooter speed limits to 10 miles per hour in partnership with the providers. Consider adding signage and enhancing speed enforcement, and also the conducting of nighttime sobriety checks, and considering disabling scooter operations on weekend nights in particular. The next one was increase the length of time for pedestrians to cross at signalized intersections. This is something that, again, will require engineering survey, but that's something to, again, ensure that our pedestrians have safe passage across those controlled intersections, especially on El Colegio. And specific to the Loop and Pardal, restrict delivery truck parking on these roads by designating specific loading zone locations, either on streets or in alleys, and the hours. I do want to highlight, like this with many others, it will require enforcement resources, which we will talk about in the next coming slides, as well as in our parking section as well. Next slide. So services connecting to Isla Vista, in the priority was maintaining the funding for the wave. We have all been waiting for the wave to launch, and we're excited for the connection between especially Goleta and Isla Vista, and to be able to get folks to those key commercial and transit locations, especially to the Amtrak station and to those grocery locations. Introducing and increasing the frequency of evening and late night bus services until 1 a.m., especially for line 24X, and expand MTD line 15X to run into the evenings as well. This is already in progress. I'm excited to report on. Increasing the capacity of the bike racks on the buses and improving bike path connectivity on Stork Road, especially between El Colegio and Camino Real Marketplace. And then establishing formal ride sharing and carpooling services. This is something that, again, I got to learn through my colleague Chisa, who was a more recent graduate, on how she used to be able to coordinate carpooling home, especially for the holidays. And I think to be able to formalize a program like that is something that can be efficient not only for the holiday seasons, but also for other more short-term or more immediate demands. Improving regional transportation service levels, such as the VCTC, Coastal Express, Clean Air Express, and regional train services, and implement a student subsidy fee to support access. And then ensuring direct bus connections from within Isla Vista to the regional transportation hubs. That again will likely improve utilization the more convenient and accessible those locations are. Next slide. So looking also at services within Isla Vista in terms of those initiatives prioritized, increasing the frequency of buses traveling to and from UCSB during peak times, increasing the enforcement of traffic and safety policies by non-law enforcement staff, providing cycling safety and maintenance training through a cyclist education program, requiring the scooter sharing companies to require and enforce better scooter parking practices. And again, corrals could be one of those options. Adding bus service and a bus stop for the southwest residential quadrant of Isla Vista, and promote peer-to-peer car sharing through partnering with services like Turo and Getaround, which are becoming more and more prevalent in other communities. Improving ADA access to bus stops, to buses at bus stops, adding signage and an online app improvements, and then adding services to MTD line 27 to improve frequency and on-time performance, increasing morning bus service to all routes, improving scooter and skateboard etiquette by installing signs and providing guidance, increasing the frequency of bike cleanups from annual to quarterly, and expanding the MTD line 27 route to cover the southwest quadrant of Isla Vista. Next slide. So these are just some examples, and I know that many of you attended the meetings where we discussed these at length, but you can see some of the opportunities for some of the initiatives, from some of the opportunities from pedestrian lighting levels, as well as the tactile curb ramps, the use of paint for lane demarcations. Right there in kind of the middle center to the left, the daylighting and micromobility corrals, you can see that's something that another community has done there at the intersection ends. And then one of the topics that did come up in several of our meetings is on that bottom left side of the screen was reconfiguration of some of our roadways with protected bike lanes that can also be used for scooters and skateboards as well. So those are obviously big initiatives. I do want to reinforce, oftentimes that means the elimination of parking. But so that's a real important consideration as we talk about some of these initiatives and how to move these processes forward, is that especially to minimize our dependency on the car, this is something that, as we talk about, being able to deploy some of these other opportunities. Next slide. And so when we talk about infrastructure, the top 10 locations were basically identified. I'm sure that it comes as no surprise that Del Playa being the top ranked location. And I won't read all of these to you, but really Del Playa and El Colegio and Pardal being, some of our most popular corridors and our most popular destinations. But again, all of our major streets really being identified for where we need to look at mobility initiatives. Next slide. And so some location specific examples. One, again, when it comes to Del Playa, was, again, I want to reinforce some of this requires engineering study and analysis, but the consideration of converting Del Playa to a one-way vehicle lane and a contraflow bidirectional bike lane. I know it can be probably hard to envision, but the reality of being able to take on an initiative like that, considering retractable or temporary bollards to close the road to vehicles on weekends, and then the consideration of accessibility elements on the sidewalk and pedestrian crossings, especially to comply with the most recent ProWag guidance, which ProWag basically just this last, I think it was 6 months ago, released updated requirements as it relates to ADA accessibility. The consideration of adding a public bathroom on park property, the consideration of street lighting, including in the Paseo alleyway, and implementing pedestrian improvement projects to increase visibility at the intersections. And again, the daylighting ordinance will help with some of that, but it does need to be enforced. And install parking solutions for bikes, skateboards off-street, and county park properties. So secure bike parking was something that did consistently come up. And what you see there on the right side, one of the images that's probably newer for some of you, is right there in the middle is an example of the bathroom facilities that we've seen. There's a lot of improvements to the footprint required for facilities like that. And in the bottom right corner is an example of the temporary bollards that also can be considered for an update such as that. Next slide. And so some location-specific examples for El Colegio is the consideration of a bidirectional bike path on the south side of El Colegio. This would basically be an expansion of the current single-lane bike path. The consideration of the bike shelters and seating and signage at all stops for the buses, and consider evaluating bus signal prioritization along this corridor, and then consideration of installing a bike and or bus only shared lane, contingent of course on traffic engineering assessment, and then implementing safe bicycle and pedestrian connections at El Colegio and Stadium Road. Installing bike signals at the intersections is something that's worked very well in bike dense communities. Evaluating and installing additional marked crosswalks in front of Isla Vista Elementary School. Considering the improvement of visibility at the intersections and the intersection in front of Friendship Manor. And then introduce accessibility elements on the sidewalk and pedestrian crossings, especially at the intersection at Los Carneros Road. And then installing more parking corrals for scooters, installing more bike racks and secure bike parking locations, and again, a parking solution for skateboards. One of the new images on this slide compared to the other slides on the upper left is an example of a skateboard rack. And on the upper right, you'll see an example of a signalized bike light as well that can be leveraged where you have those bike parking locations. So each of the top 10 locations has a similar location-specific example in the plan. We just wanted to include a couple of examples for all of you, for anybody who hasn't dug into those details. Next slide. So in terms of district-wide initiatives for all streets, just the overall improvement of the sidewalk network, including the pavement, the removal of obstructions, and the connected sidewalk, and the improved accessibility for ADA, as well as just pedestrian access in general, and then implementing street lighting improvements and installing pedestrian level lighting, and also performing regular maintenance checks on street lighting and the street trees and plants to make sure that we don't have overage or spillover that impedes visibility, and also visibility for pedestrians and drivers alike. And to consider improving the bike network, including adding those dedicated bike lanes and upgrading the lanes to class 1 and or class 4. That is a heavy lift, and I do want to reinforce it could mean the elimination of some vehicle parking, but as we start to talk about mobility prioritization, that'll be part of that bigger conversation. Implementing the daylighting policy, as I mentioned, again, that is in our California Vehicle Code now, which could ultimately provide more micro-mobility parking. And paint sharrows on all roads where bikes and vehicles share usage. And if you don't know what a sharrow is, there's a symbol that goes on the road that indicates it's in the middle with a bike to show for cars that bikes have equal access to that lane of traffic as well. Next slide. And so district-wide initiatives for the border between Isla Vista and UCSB, improving access points between both locations, including pavement maintenance, landscaping signage, and removal of obstructions. And again, the installation of scooter parking corrals at the connection points between the eastern border of Isla Vista and UCSB, knowing that the scooters can't go on campus, basically having those identified corral locations where those devices can be stored, and to create and remove those inhibitors or basically obstructions that do often fall into our roadways and onto our sidewalks. Initiatives for all bus stops, improve bus stops by installing bus shelters, seating, and signage, and improve the accessibility overall that also allows for ADA ramps so that we can easily access the bus as well. Next slide. And initiatives for all major streets, identify locations where safe points to cross in the middle of the block are needed, and the consideration of a combination of curb bulb outs, marked crosswalks, and or raised crosswalks, which also can serve as a speed reducer as well, and improving north-south sidewalks, installing skateboard parking solutions, and again, installing more scooter parking corrals, especially in front of our local businesses as well. And initiatives for all intersections, implement intersection improvement program, which includes stop signs at all of our crossways, marked crosswalks, traffic calming, curb ramps, and the removal of vegetation that impedes access or visibility, installing bicycle signals at intersections, and paint bike boxes at all intersections where bikes and vehicles share usage. And in terms of next steps, evaluating the feasibility of the initiatives that we've outlined here and aligning the funding opportunities and pursuing resources to pursue these initiatives as well, and collaborating with initiatives that are already in progress, including the Ocean Road Housing Project, the existing county ATP funded projects, as well as the bike bollards on El Colegio, and establish VMT GHG based metrics. So to be able to leverage those industry standards into our metrics so that any initiatives, any improvements that are done, you have a way to measure, monitor, and assess and evaluate. Because the data is there, we need to be able to ensure that we're looking at the data and the impacts to demonstrate the effectiveness and whether to continue down that path or to change direction. And as we go to the next slide, it includes my thank you and our contact information, and we are here to answer any questions in support of the next steps.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dixon. I want to start with a quick question from your last slide. Could you explain to me what VMT/GHG based metrics are?
Absolutely. I'm going to ask my colleague Chisa to go ahead and come on to the line because we were just discussing both that and the ATP funded project as well. So Chisa, would you mind to come off mute and share a little bit more about the vehicle miles traveled metric?
So the VMT is the vehicle miles traveled. So basically in coordination with the county's ATP, which is the active transportation plan, we want to kind of set those metrics so that we are measuring how well we are able to reduce those vehicle miles traveled in Isla Vista as we start to see the mode shift for Isla Vista residents who are primarily relying on cars right now and using more public transportation or more micromobility as those initiatives come up. And GHG is the greenhouse gas emissions across all the transportation or mobility initiatives. We want to make sure that sustainability is at the forefront. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing those sustainability initiatives in coordination with the county's ATP, which overall has a focus on the sustainability aspect as well.
And I think you'll find that those standards for metrics are maintained not only by the US DOT, but also NACTO, the EPA, and others that have basically started to standardize some of those measures as well. And so my suggestion to Chisa's point is, as you begin to monitor the utilization and increase in some of the other mobility solutions, that's really one of your starting points. And then being able to leverage some of the technology monitors, which I think we can solution through some pursuit of grant monies. That's really one of the challenges, is how do you measure the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as well as vehicles mile traveled. It's a combination of things. Some of it has to do with ridership on the alternative devices or buses, the reduction of the number of cars parking in Isla Vista. And this is why when we talk about the importance of data, you have baselines now that you'll be able to measure against. And so you could start with a simple metrics as much as increased ridership on the different buses and basically decrease in occupancy on your block faces. This is your opportunity as we start to talk about moving forward to really start to measure and monitor those impacts.
All right, thank you for that answer. I'll ask my board members if there's any questions at this time. Director Brandt?
First of all, thank you. This is a very thorough presentation. And this plan is thick. It's hundreds of pages. You put a lot of work into this, as does our staff. And we've already seen it bear fruit because this was a major part of why the county was able to get their ATP grant. So we're doing great things with this. And if I talked about everything I had thoughts on, we'd be here all night. So I'll ask a couple questions. You mentioned an idea for a student subsidy for transportation services. Can you talk more about that? What does that look like?
It's like the MTD fee that people pay that provides cheaper access to the bus.
And have we evaluated how ours maybe compares to other communities?
No, it's just one of the ideas that have come up through the process of getting easier tickets to regional buses and Amtrak. They get a 15% discount now, but that was one of the things, is like, how can we make it more seamless to use those?
Well, I'm certainly very intrigued in anything that could potentially generate that revenue. This is a very ambitious plan when it comes to our public transit. It also, we know, is dependent upon the funding that's available. So I'm glad that that is something that is considered, and would definitely love to learn more as we go forward with the plan.
Yes.
To Spencer's point, I wanted to make a comment because it struck me when you said that there's free bus service for students. And I don't think that's actually accurate, because students do pay a lock-in fee, and then they receive in exchange the service of riding the bus. So I just think that's important to make sure that we know that students, Santa Barbara City College as well as UCSB students, do pay for bus service.
That's fair, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I was really struck by how many times we offer solutions for scooters. And I just want to know, are scooters worth it? And especially when there's only 300 scooters permitted by the County of Santa Barbara, and that all the areas around Isla Vista don't allow scooters. So I just think that's something to consider as when we're having those conversations, that, are scooters worth it?
Director Brandt?
I actually had that written down as my second question, which is, so they're technically called micro mobility devices. Why are they only confined to Isla Vista? How come they can't go in Goleta or on campus?
It's not uncommon for many communities have locked down or locked out the micromobility devices. And as more communities have started to really tighten the requirements, I've seen that across the country, and especially here in California, the elimination of the micromobility devices, because again, if you can only stay in that little box of an area, the feasibility of the program to be able to be sustainable for that operator has not proven to be successful in other communities. The opportunity to dig in deeper with the vendor would be a suggested approach to really understand the demand. I do think that the consideration of turning them off on weekend nights, for example, I would imagine, and I'm speculating here, would severely inhibit their business model. But when you really start to think about the utilization and digging in deeper on that program, I think it's a very worthy question to ask and to determine whether or not it is an effective resource. But again, knowing that one of the recommendations is having corrals at the campus entrance location to ensure that we have designated locations of where they should be stored, it's apparent that you have usage for it of people commuting to campus. But I do think the opportunity to do a deep dive with the ownership of that company to understand the numbers and quantities and the usage rates would be a worthwhile next endeavor to determine the effectiveness of it. But it's not uncommon for communities to not welcome the micromobility devices. And in fact, we're seeing the footprint decrease substantially across the board.
So just as a quick follow-up to that, I remember that we used to have different kind of micromobility in 2018, 2019, which was a bike share. But that wasn't just confined to Isla Vista. So are they treated differently under the laws?
UCSB has its own rules against scooters, and so does Goleta.
But that would not be the same if we had bike share.
It needs to be determined. I will say that I've seen that bikes have been treated differently than the micromobility devices, but it is something that would be a worthwhile question. I will share that the only places that I have seen the shared bicycle programs really being effective is in larger cities that can support the entire infrastructure, kind of community wide. But when you start to have kind of peer-to-peer communities trying to connect the devices, because of vandalism, theft, and many other compounded impacts, it hasn't necessarily proven to be, I think, the money-making venture that some of the companies that supported it in the past. So I'm not seeing as large of a footprint on shared bicycles, but I do think that some of the, I'll call it, liability concerns must be a different opinion compared to the micromobility. But that's me speculating at this point. I don't have any proof behind that, but I can share that the bike share programs are not as prevalent post-pandemic. But again, the micromobility devices, the shared programs, the only places that I'm really seeing them are in college adjacent communities, and some of the colleges do allow the devices on campus. I haven't seen that in California per se, but outside of the state, I have seen colleges that do allow them on campus. But those are really the only places that I've seen the micromobility really continuing to really succeed, if that's the right word, or continue to be supported.
Director Freeman.
The bikes that we had here, for what it's worth, were actually not just allowed by campus, but UCSB had gone out of their way in order to court a company and actually get them to be here and work carefully with the rules that they were going to have. And that was part of the thing is that the usual scooter company is taking your usual big tech standpoint of like, oh, there's a local regulation. Well, maybe we just ignore it long enough. We'll force them to change it. Whereas UCSB worked specifically with the company with the bikes that was willing to do everything the UCSB was trying to do in order to make them be safe and effective and not in the way of everything. Kind of rusty on the arguments because I haven't thought about this in a while, but the scooters were just, scooters are just brutal. I mean, they just get strewn everywhere. They end up in the blocking the sidewalks. They end up getting thrown on the lawns. They end up getting thrown in the ocean and getting destroyed. They've got batteries that tend to get poorly tracked and recycled later. They've got while they seem like they are more effective than driving a car for distance, they still have they're trucks that go around by people late at night that are not, they're just random people who are driving normal, potentially inefficient trucks, moving all of the scooters back and forth around, causing it to if you actually calculate the amount of emissions when you take into inclusive the studies I saw were actually like really bad about the scooters. Like the scooters are just like horrible, but you know, everyone loves the scooters, they're fun. I like the scooters. I used the scooters for a while until eventually I actually had a pretty bad fall on one of the scooters, and I was like, okay, I need to stop using the scooters. And that's another thing, is the scooters are somewhat dangerous, and that was I think a concern that we had even had here at this board a couple times about late at night people who are drunk using the scooters. Seems like sort of a good thing, except for the fact that a drunk person using the scooter is not going to be a very safe way to use a scooter. So it's yeah, I always find it sad that there's amount of effort that we end up putting into essentially subsidizing the existence of some company by figuring out how to deal with all of the externalities that they end up throwing at us, because some people find it fun, but again, they're losing money. They're not even making money. So it's like
yeah. I saw your hand. We're gonna go to public comment in a little bit. I want to ask another question. Over on slide 11, we have policy and initiatives prioritized. And we have the third point about lowering the vehicle speed limit by 5 miles per hour. And then in a different clause down to 25 miles per hour in front of Friendship Manor. What is the average miles per hour limit in residential areas of Isla Vista, or in just like the box of Isla Vista?
So everything in Isla Vista basically is 25 miles per hour, with the exception of El Colegio, except for in front of the school. So that's where the want and the request from the community was wanting to lower the speed limit throughout Isla Vista because of the density, the bikes, the pedestrians and such. So that was the specific request, as well as on El Colegio, not only lowering, but also specifically not only in front of the elementary school, but in front of Friendship Manor was the other want for the reduction. But again, these are roadways that, in terms of their classification from the traffic engineer, this would be something that would require the traffic engineering analysis to determine what is feasible.
Got it. And so that analysis, as well as just the physical infrastructure of a feedback sign, those are the main factors giving this item $2 signs, or are there other factors that would make this more expensive?
No, I think that the feedback sign is probably where the $2 signs come in at, is because of the fact that you have that infrastructure that would have to go into that. But the lowering of the signs, the lowering of the speed limit would obviously have to be dictated by the traffic engineer. But given the substantialness and the want of the community, this should be something that would be put in front of the county for evaluation and consideration. And ultimately, the traffic engineer would have to rule on that request.
Got it. Thank you. Director Freeman.
while we're poking at those $2 signs, I'm actually curious, in contrasting them to the prior two items, $1 signs. I just kind of assumed, maybe very incorrectly, like in the complete opposite. Like it's just like it's we're make so much money on the enforcement or something, but that the enforcement would cost a lot of money. And those two items require enforcement, whereas I presume that third one, because it doesn't mention enforcement, is just either California Highway Patrol or the existing sheriff's department people would just be arbitrarily enforcing speed limits. We wouldn't be enforcing speed limits. That's why. So I assumed that would be.
I wouldn't even consider that enforcement wasn't taken into account of those $2 signs. I think that the consideration was for obviously an engineering assessment, but more importantly, the digital signage required, that would be installed on El Colegio for that consideration.
Great, I'm actually trying to figure out the prior to is that the prior to the $1 sign require, is enforcement not expensive? I assumed enforcement
No,
would be.
but I think it's a separate package, so these would be like, side effects, like.
It's more the signs, the educational materials, et cetera. It doesn't necessarily consider the bodies to go out there to enforce it. It's really about what it would cost to get it installed and make it happen, basically.
The enforcement's part of the parking compliance program.
Director Brand?
And is it true that if this policy prescription was paired with the infrastructure recommendations for El Colegio, probably wouldn't even need as much enforcement? Because
That's fair. I mean, that's
all
very
wrapped.
reasonable. Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to visibility and the regards of with the signage, and then obviously that compliance aspect of it. You know, you've got the combination of 3 law enforcement agencies, primarily CHP, obviously for speed enforcement, but the reality of if people see folks getting pulled over or ticketed for that with, you know, the education campaign that comes along with it, typically that's what really has the impact. It's just like when you see CHP pulling somebody over on the freeway, it encourages most of us to slow down because that's the whole purpose of enforcement, right? Is for people to comply with the rules.
Yes.
So Julie, I just wanted to ask a question about, so there's this number of recommendations. We have different groupings. So we have groupings by Del Playa, El Colegio, then we have district-wide, infrastructure. And so my question is there the metric what we have here is all by money, right? And I know that in the next section, for next steps, you have evaluate feasibility. And I think feasibility is a really interesting word, and I'm very curious as to how you define feasibility. So I'll throw that out to you, can think about it. But I wanted to ask, as all these recommendations have come from the community, can you give some sense of how many people, maybe you said this and I spaced out, but how many people participated in giving recommendations? Like, because there's a lot of things that are prioritized here, and I'm just trying to understand, like, for example, number 10, improve skateboard and scooter etiquette. Is that one person? Is that 10 people? I'm just trying to understand how much went into these recommendations.
Yeah, so the people did not write the recommendations. We
Okay.
did, thousands of people had input that became a list of project ideas,
Yeah,
and then they ranked those project ideas.
that's
So
what I'm trying to understand.
people didn't
Okay.
say, I want a bike signal at intersections. They said, I have issues at intersections as a biker.
And then we derived, the
We
company then
derived
derived this
Ideas,
list.
and then they ranked the ideas.
Okay,
after
got
that.
it.
Yeah.
Okay,
And all that data is in the appendices.
okay, got it.
Right. And the important part about the feasibility aspect, I'm very glad that you asked that, because one of the things that I will be very clear with, you know, some of our partners, including the county, you know, they basically looked at some of these and, you know, there's some that are not likely or not feasible, because that's why we were trying to highlight at the onset is that there might be some conflicts between some of these, like being able to have dedicated bike lanes, you know, versus, you know, what is the give for something like that? That's why when you start to look at maybe the realities of corrals at the ends of the intersections, that could be something that could be a really good solution given the daylighting ordinance, for example. So some of these could be a complement to each other, but some of them could be in conflict with each other as well. And so when you really start to look at how these really go together and kind of putting them on the master board, there's quite a bit of overlap, as you heard me, you know, some of the redundancy aspects of some of the things that was suggested. But some of these, it's also, you've got to really look at what is the gain versus what is the cost, and what are you giving up in order to proceed with some of these as well. But to Jonathan's point, the realities of what the community asked for, and then being able to come up with these different suggested approaches to try to tackle those concerns is really, you know, how to kind of put it together, then to look at it from an overall, from a mobility perspective, you know, being able to have, you know, stop signs at all of the intersection crossings, being able to consider having signalized bike bike crossings at the signalized intersections, things like that. Those are some of the things that we can start to talk about, the low hanging fruit and where we might be able to get some of the bigger bang for our buck as well. But that's really where looking at this in whole and really looking at where can we have the most impact, but also coinciding with where the county has projects already rolling that's mentioned on the last slide, as well as places where we might be able to leverage some of those longer term strategies. When we talk about the connected sidewalks and then looking at the prioritization of those connected sidewalks, I think there's ways to connect the dots and leverage existing and upcoming projects so that we can also see like what is achievable. Lighting throughout Isla Vista is a very expensive endeavor, and sidewalks throughout Isla Vista is an expensive endeavor, but to take advantage of the priority of the existing projects is important.
Sorry about that.
That's helpful. Thank you. Very helpful.
At the last page of the report, it says that there's a summary of the problems and then the solutions related to them. So it makes it easier to connect what people brought up as issues and what we're doing to solve.
Is there anywhere in the report that identifies these suggestions with the lead agency or the lead entity? I guess a lot of these would be county, right?
It's almost all county.
It's almost
or
all
MTD.
county,
Yeah,
okay.
county and MTD.
Okay. All right.
Okay, any other questions from directors at this time? I see none, so I'm gonna go to the public. If there's any public comments or questions at this time, please raise your hand. I will call on you and then please identify yourself and then share your comments.
We have one on Zoom, by the way.
Hey there. Yeah,
Hey,
my
yeah.
name is Esteban Solis, and I noticed you're talking about the scooters, and I think those are pretty dangerous. I don't support those. I've seen those scooter accidents in Isla Vista, and I was hit by one on a sidewalk in Isla Vista. So, so that's what I wanted to share. I don't think they're safe, and it sounds like they're not even being cost effective. And that's not good. Maybe even bikes would be a better idea.
All right, thank you for those comments. Yes.
Hey, Julie, how you doing? It's Henry. Couple things. Number one, the scooter issue. I agree, with everything that was said. They are dangerous. But one thing we have to remember here, and it's a very interesting observation I've made. You have the ones that are owned by the company Line and Bird as well. I think the same guy that runs Line, runs Bird as well in the area. He's a friend of mine. And then you have the ones that are privately owned by the average person. What I noticed in terms of good versus bad behavior is the people on the privately owned scooters, they follow the law. They follow the rules. They stay on the road. They're not hitting the sidewalk. It's the Line scooters that I see causing problems, such as Mr. Solis experienced. For some reason, also they're the ones that you see abandoned on sidewalks and side porta potties, thrown off the cliffs and everything. It's the Line and Bird scooters that you see as the biggest offenders of traffic, things like that. Then there's the thing about the skateboard racks. Again, I know, but I'm gonna say it as a skateboarder, an avid skateboarder. Every skater that I talk to about it, they really aren't too thrilled with those. They won't really. I think we could save money by not investing in that venture. Skaters, we like to carry our board with us. That's why we have a warm spot on the side of our pants and sweatshirts and stuff. But I think it would save some money to kind of diminish that option or eliminate it. Diminishment and elimination are two different things. But going back to the scooters, like I said, there's a definite noticeable difference between the private scooter owner and the public scooter user. And the public scooter user, and the biggest problems are Friday and Saturday night. And that's when you see, at our apartment, for example, I see anywhere from 2 to 3, maybe 4, sometimes scooters on the sidewalk blocking. I got to go out there and move in the morning. So it's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you for those comments. Yes.
I'm Hillary Blackerby, and I work at MTD, but I've been very involved in this one since there's the application for the grant that paid for this, and just want to really thank the staff. It's been just complete pleasure to work with, and Fiona as well, and all other folks. And it's been a long process, but it's been, I think, very robust, and I'm happy to see what's come out of it. Obviously, there's a lot of bus recommendations in it, and the great thing is when you have really good community engagement. None of this, I will say, is like a surprise. None of it's like, what? I had no idea, right? But it's very important when you have these things in plans. That's when you can go after what you need to make it happen, right? And now, operating funds for transit, there's not a lot of like pots of money just waiting around, unfortunately. But for a lot of the other things, for a lot of the infrastructure work, there are a lot of, sort of, and increasingly more pots of funding, especially within the state of California, that this is like, they love it, right? It's catnip. So all those things about low-hanging fruit, putting things together, putting packages together, working with the county and other stakeholders to do that. When you go to, for example, the state active transportation program, and you go, we're going to do these sidewalks, we're going to do these, crosswalks, stuff, like little bits and pieces, which generally are actually quite expensive all put together. And you go, look at all this public outreach we did for this plan. The county has their own ATP plan that they did. You get more points. And the more points you get, the more, the more likely you are to get that funding, right? And so it's like the state programs out of 100 points, the funding they just did, all the ones that were funded had 92 or higher points, right? Like it's very competitive, but when you have that kind of good public outreach and you're in on your map, you're in low income communities, you're in all these, you have all these sort of demographic characteristics about Isla Vista that lend themselves to getting that. So I look forward to helping any way I can to help make this stuff happen, because I think it's something that's been needed for a long time for Ivy to get that love and attention. This community works sort of despite itself in all the different things when it comes to mobility, but I think a lot of the safety things that have been mentioned can really make it even better and safer. So anyway, I want to congratulate you and thank you for letting your staff work on this for 4 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks.
Thank you for those comments.
I'll go.
Yes.
I'm Sue Dixon. I want to say it seems like a really good start. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read the whole
The book.
thing. I really wanted to, actually. I'm serious, but something got in my way. But I did have a question about the street lighting improvements and installation of pedestrian level lighting. Can you be more specific about what that is? Like, an improvement for me might not be an improvement for somebody else. So does that mean bigger and better, or like brighter, or?
Those, the short lights at UCSB, if you go walk on campus, like that's pedestrian level street.
That's pedestrian level.
Yeah.
Okay. And are you talking about replacing the prism lights? Or?
No, just where there's darkness, using those instead of the old big street lights, using those instead. Like pedestrian small lights instead of the big lights where there's gaps.
Where there's gaps.
Not replacing.
You can work on the placement later.
That's a separate whole other situation.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Arthur Kennedy. I was under the impression that when you fired up one of these mobile devices with your credit card, it continued running until you uploaded a picture of it safely parked somewhere. Seems to me that would cut down on that. Oh, I just left it in the middle of the street.
It's hit or miss. Like, you can, I've done it, you take the picture. There's no like real regulation from what I've seen of them.
And then
checking.
someone takes it down, right?
Yeah, like you can just say, oh, I left it good.
I'm not talking to say, I'm talking about uploading a picture.
Yeah, no one's looking at that picture after. Really.
I would suppose somebody whose credit card running would call for, look at the picture.
How these companies work.
I don't know, keep on.
All right, thank you for those comments. Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, I like the way that they are focusing on those feedback mechanisms to monitor. The ideas she brought up about monitoring by looking at the feedback mechanisms between the parking and how public transit MTD buses are being used versus parking. So that's really good. That's really good to keep track of those variables that seem to be unrelated, but they are related and really provide a good picture of whether alternative transportation programs and mechanisms are working.
Yes.
I'll go. So yeah, thanks so much. You all really care about Isla Vista and all this stuff, so really appreciate that. I think the bus should be free. I think we should, long term, we should aim for people to not be punished by having to pay anything when they get on the bus. I think you rely on about $2 million. Is that? Yeah, it's okay. I think it's a few $1,000,000 that would be needed for that. But in the meantime, before we reach that goal, anything we can do to make it, feel like you're being rewarded for doing the thing that's better for the planet and not punished, would be good. So yeah, I love the Trader Joe's shuttle or bus, and just figuring out what will make it better. Yeah, I don't like sidewalks at all. They hurt my joints. My friend who's a wheelchair user also hates sidewalks. She prefers like DG, and we can push her over lots of other things other than just sidewalks. So I would say if people want there to be consistency, maybe like prioritizing that at least one side has a sidewalk, maybe not both sides of the street need the sidewalk. And then see if there can at least be like no obstructions. Like, are people putting because some of them it's kind of a nice path, but it's like hard packed dirt, but then there'll be a trash can or there'll be a light pole or just, but I would say that could be the priority rather than it all having to be sidewalk. Sidewalks also have a big greenhouse gas emission. They're like stopping the earth from breathing. The creation of the concrete and everything has big impact, and they don't last forever. They need to be repaired. An idea I had for a task Ivy Beautiful could do would be, in the meantime, when there's cracks in the pavement or the sidewalk and they can't be fixed immediately, paint them yellow or red or something, so people have a better chance of seeing it. It might not be foolproof, but it might save some people. Yeah. And then what else? I guess that's it for now. Yeah. Don't want to keep us here all night.
Thank you for those comments.
You have someone on Zoom.
All right, yeah.
Barry Remis.
All right, our commenter on Zoom, please share us your name and start your comments.
All right, good evening, President Aguiar and directors and board members. My name is Barry Remis, and I'm with MOVE Santa Barbara County. I'm going to echo what Ms. Blackerby mentioned. We have, although admittedly not as often as we'd hoped, Move has been a partner and a facilitator in the long, extensive outreach that's been going on for this. I don't want to call it a project. This grand endeavor. Which has been great, and we really want to thank the staff members and also the board members that have been participating in this throughout the years. We were delighted to be able to be present at many of the stakeholder meetings, the outreach meetings, the town halls, to be able to be facilitators and get note takers, et cetera, at some of the pop-ups. And so it's really, really great to be able to see this come to fruition in terms of at least the plan, and Ms. Dixon and her team to be able to really compile all of the feedback and get this put together, the prioritizations based on the input from the public, and to be able to form a more cohesive vision in terms of what the prioritization might be. Just a caution of obviously, let's not necessarily too preemptively get too hung up on the dollar sign elements of things, but more to really just, I guess, prioritize based on the needs and what you've heard from the public. And as you do clearly go through the engineering analyses of this, to also, to Ms. Dixon's point, that there may be some conflicts in terms of what can be done or what can't be done. But a couple things I wanted to highlight. When it comes to speed and lowering speed limits, one thing that I haven't seen mentioned yet, and which we would recommend as you speak with Mr. Smart and the county in terms of the traffic survey and analyses, to leverage AB 43, which came into effect recently, I think as of June this year, which empowers, if you haven't heard of it, empowers local government agencies to further lower speeds by 5 or even more miles per hour, identifying roads and corridors as what we call safety corridors, especially next to businesses and also where there's high concentrations, bingo, of pedestrians and bicyclists. So your neighboring the city of Goleta is actually they voted unanimously to lower speed limits, in a plethora of streets. This county of Santa Barbara themselves actually on December 3rd is going to be going to the Board of Supervisors to be able to vote on doing the same thing at a number of streets throughout the county, using the AB 43 new legislation to be able to lower street speeds. So would highly encourage you to be able to, as the analysis goes on, to work with the county on that. And again, the transit priority is great. The dedicated bike lanes, the protected bike lanes, and also the daylighting, taking advantage of the bike and potentially micro-mobility device corrals at the intersections. Anything to be able to increase the pedestrian safety, and really want to highlight the importance of marked crosswalks as well. Move is a big proponent of that, and if they are marked, to also include stop lines ahead of the crosswalk so that cars are stopping before the crosswalk, not on it, is also another good thing to take into consideration. So we certainly hope to be able to remain involved, especially as prioritization and analyses go on with the county. And we do look forward to this eventually being implemented, and hopefully some can happen sooner than others. So thanks again for the input, and congratulations, everybody.
All right, thank you for those comments.
Your one more, Lisa Oglesby.
All right, Lisa, please start your comments.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Oglesby. I serve on the board of the Isla Vista Food Cooperative, and we were also one of the community partners as part of this project. And I mostly just want to throw my support behind the proposals that we have seen and the project overall. It has been a very thorough, iterative process. It's taken a lot of time, but with that, a lot of care. I really appreciate the attention that's being paid, not just for safety, but also for the smoothness and for the very different level of stakeholders that we have. We have people walking, biking, driving in cars, using all different modes of transportation in a situation where we have grown up sort of organically, and it really requires a time to come back to a master plan. I think that the plan that we have does a rather good job of addressing the needs of the residents of Isla Vista, and the many different ways that they move around, and also keeps eyes on the future of Isla Vista, which we really want to be a part of, and we really hope this vision comes to light. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for those comments. All right, well, thank you everyone in general for your public comments. I'll come back to the board and see if there's further board commentary or discussion or questions.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Jonathan, you can't tease me if I don't know, since I don't know this, but my question is, can only the county apply for ATP grants for Isla Vista? Or can Isla Vista apply for ATP grants for Isla Vista?
I think only
IVCSD.
probably them, because they're in charge of the roads and they own all the property. The ATP, yeah.
Dang. Okay, thank you.
But we help apply. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they
no, I
did
knew
only
that.
get the 8 million because of us. So.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah. Thanks.
All right, I'm not seeing more discussion or questions from board members. Director Brand.
Well, I'll just take the opportunity to thank everyone that participated in this process. This was a lengthy process. It's probably the longest public process that we've undertaken, because it's coming out to be almost 4 years at this point, I think. And I really, the strength of this plan and the reason that we're hearing such good input and such good support is because you've already kind of given so much feedback to it, and I really appreciate it. That is, as Hillary mentioned before she left, what actually makes the program or the plan so strong, and it's what allowed the county to win the ATP grant. They got bumped up 2 points just from our draft work getting submitted, which was pretty cool. Really, for me, this is about climate, convenience, and wellness for the community. Climate, because we know the biggest source of climate emissions is transportation, and particularly people in their cars. This makes it more convenient for people to be able to get out of their cars, to walk around, to bike, to use other forms of alternative transportation, to take the bus. One of the really striking figures that I saw is there's a chart that says reasons for not taking the bus. And there was something like, I want to say 13% of people that their main reason for not taking the bus is they didn't know how to track the bus.
Right.
I mean, that's an easily solvable problem. Right. So there are so many things that are low hanging fruit. There are also so many things in the plan that are really concrete, great examples that are visionary, that will really help lead to wellness in the community, which is that we know that when people do take the bus, when they cycle, when they go on their skateboard, when they're walking around, that's good for health, that's good for wellness, and it makes our community more connected. So this plan really is I think some of the best compilation of Isla Vista's values on all those things. And I just can't thank our team enough for all the work that you put into this. Fiona included. I wish that she could get to be here to also share in the culmination of all of her work. Thank you to our partners as well for all of your input that has really made this the best plan it could be.
Yes.
Thank you. I just really want to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude for our community, because they have been with us and seen my name pop up in their email a million times, getting and gathering feedback. I know more about transportation than I ever did before. I had no idea what a contraflow bike lane is, and now I could probably do a full PowerPoint on it. But I just really am grateful for all of the support along the way, both in support of these efforts, but also the constructive feedback that we've heard as well. And really, the passion that comes from our community, taking the time to have those conversations and making their voices heard. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about Ivy, and I'm really grateful for that. And just to our board for guiding this process for so long. It's probably been one of the coolest projects that I've seen come to fruition. And thanking our stakeholders for making all of these efforts happen. And yeah, I do wish Fiona was here. And I want to thank Jonathan as well, because I've learned so much from him through this process. He's been incredibly thoughtful in terms of making sure that all of the feedback is outlined in these plans. And for Dixon for jumping in and picking up a project that they didn't start and making it what it is today. It's fantastic. So just thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm super excited.
Thank you for those comments. Any other directors at this time? Before we, go to action on this item, I do want to thank our consultant Dixon for specifically picking up a project that had been troublesome in its timeline for us and our community, and the amount of effort that we put into communicating with previous partners just made it difficult. And then getting to enjoy efficiency with a already trusted partner with the Dixon team is great. So I want to thank them. I want to highlight a little bit my kind of thoughts on this micro mobility concept and specifically scooters, since we heard so many comments about it. For years, I've heard complaints from neighbors of mine in the 6-8 neighborhood against scooters just for aesthetic reasons, but also for just the right of way and just not enjoying them. And so it's something that I've been pushed by my close neighbors to push against. And what can we do to change this? What happened to Isla Vista's bicycle culture and skateboard culture, and now we have scooter culture. And so I want to I want to acknowledge the comments that we heard today from a lot of community members here, and also recognize that there's tons of community members who aren't here who might tell me 50 reasons why scooters are really important. I have not been convinced. I have not ridden one. I choose not to because a bicycle is free. Walking is still free for me. So I think it's something that we will have to consider as a board in the future, as we start to implement these needs assessed, whether or not we should be dedicating so much effort and unclear dollar signs to scooters and a business that is just taking profit out of Isla Vista that to me isn't serving a new problem for Isla Vistans. Isla Vistans have always gotten around our 1.5 miles box. I just want to acknowledge that as a director, I have some concerns about micromobility when it comes to a profit generating tech company, and it just causes headaches for folks. Now, some of the positives, I'm really thankful for MTD as an entity and the way that they've been patient with us about launching the wave. I'm hoping that we can have that launched soon in Isla Vista, because these problems about micro transit just outside of Isla Vista have been concerns for Isla Vistans for as long as the Goleta Amtrak has been there, and probably as long as the Santa Barbara Amtrak has been there. It was a huge issue when I was a student employee, a student here, and less cars are on the streets. Did you have a friend who had a car who could get you to the grocery store area, even the closer ones at Albertsons? And so the wave will be a huge improvement and will, I think, introduce more Isla Vistans to using public transportation as a safe method of getting around. Not only is it effective, it incentivizes using the MTD services across the board. And I think that's great. And we can, that will help MTD grow in our community. So I'm really thankful for a ton of these things, but I definitely want to highlight the bus element here as just something that has always been important for Isla Vistans, and it's very important to me that we allow more Isla Vistans to travel in that way. In general, I'll be supporting this adoption of this plan, and so I'm ready to hear a motion if there's not further discussion. Yes.
Sorry, I know you like to have the last word.
I know. I don't.
Prerogative of the chair.
Yeah, please go.
I wanted just to also echo what Spencer said. This plan is so authentically Isla Vista, bringing together so many different stakeholders and being collaborative and open and professional and just hearing from lots of different voices. It's such a well done plan, and just soup to nuts. And boy, you guys have been through so much staff with hiring another entity to shepherd this, having them step off that train, and then And then Dixon really coming in to just really take this and make it just so great, so comprehensive. And I'm just really appreciative of staff, of Dixon, of all the people that have contributed to the plan. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge George Thurlow, who I remember when you all got this grant, he was just ecstatic, over the moon. He was a previous director representing the campus on this board. And he was just so pleased with this and just felt like this was going to be something so positive for Isla Vista. So I just wanted to acknowledge George and his many years of service and his help on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say something.
Yes.
As well. No, it's been a long time coming. We were gonna apply for a different grant and then we didn't get it, and we got this one instead. So I enjoy it because it's the most comprehensive outlook of our situation. No one's ever done this before. Like all the services, the needs, everything listed out. Doesn't exist anywhere else. So that's really cool about that we get to have this asset. And yeah, Sydney's position got funded originally before, and that's how we got started. So thank you, Sydney. And Julie, I just asked her casually, can you take over this?
Yeah.
Just casually, no context, just can you take this on? And she said yes right away. And Hillary, who did the application essentially for us. And so lots of help went into this. Spencer did a lot of the legwork of reviewing things and helping keep, just there's so much content. I mean, I think I read all 300 pages twice in the last week just to do the last feedback edits and everything. So lots went into this, lots of people worked on this. Every town hall had like 50 to 70 people there. So people care. I think it's like the most popular thing we talk about when we go out into the community. So. And on the bus thing, one of the recommendations is for the community center to be a bus education hub. If you go deep into the plan, that's one of the ideas, is to do like a bus information center, not a transit center, but bus information hub at the community center. So hopefully 13% will then know how to use the.
Yes. One more piece of good news that is one of our recommendations that looks like it's already being implemented is the increasing regional train service with Metrolink coming early next year, and within the next 2 years, a new Amtrak Surfliner train, a new daily train to bring it up to 7 daily trips. So that's really exciting too.
And I think the plan also outlines that there's like future projects to connect to the Bay Area with trains. It mentions them, I think, that there will be in 20 years or something.
Yeah.
Trains directed to the Bay Area.
Yep. San Luis Obispo got a big grant that will help their station be able to ultimately do that.
When is this plan kicking with the 7 trains?
So right now it's the infrastructure phase. So there needs to be a new siding built at Ortega Hill in Summerlin.
Okay.
That will allow enough capacity on the corridor for LoSan, the regional operator, Pacific Surfliner, to add a 7th train, daily train. But separate from that, Metrolink should be coming early next year. That's what I heard.
We take the train a lot. We load our bikes, take the train down to the Union Station down in Los Angeles with our backpacks and stuff, go ripping around the city, check in our hotel and mess around the city and repeat on the way back up north. Throw the bikes on the train and go. Fantastic way to get around.
Awesome.
So looking forward to that.
We just need a motion to, I guess, adopt the plans.
All right, is there a motion on the floor from any board members?
I will move adoption of the plan.
All right, is there a second?
I will second.
All right, we have the motion by Director Brandt and the second by Director Craig. Is there any public comment on this motion?
We're all commented out.
All right, I see no further public comment on this motion, so I will ask for a vote. All those who are in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. And this motion passes 6-0-0-1. Good work,
Where's the
everyone.
champagne? The sparkling cider.
And now we will move on to item 4.3, the Isla Vista Parking Action Plan.
Oh, and if I can just mention,
Yes.
we did have somebody join, Jennifer, who worked on this plan too. So I just wanted to make sure that she's recognized. Just joined.
I might need a break between all
Oh,
this
if you wanna,
transportation
yeah.
stuff.
This next one's gonna be just
Because
as
this is a
long.
lot of transportation stuff all in all. Can you have like a 5-minute break?
Okay.
Yeah, this is gonna be a longer presentation.
It is?
Okay, yeah, we will have a 5-minute break so we can reconvene this meeting at 7:45 PM. Can we, mute this?
Oh, yeah.
Starbucks has been ordered. We can now resume the meeting.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to reconvene this meeting from that brief recess. It is now 7:52 p.m. We're joining our discussion action items. We're at item 4.3, the Isla Vista Parking Action Plan.
Okay, well, we'll turn it over back to Julie Dixon for presentation on the parking.
Great, thank you. And as Jonathan mentioned, we've now been joined by my colleague Jennifer as well. And thank you for acknowledging, Jonathan. The mobility plan would not have been possible without Jennifer's contributions. And I'm really grateful to acknowledge she came online just as you guys were sharing all of your feedback. So thank you for that. But now let's move on to the next item, which is the Isla Vista parking study. I do believe everyone is familiar with the fact that this is a project that was funded through IVCSD as well as UCSB as well as the county. And as you go to the next slide, you all have met the team as well. And my colleague Cameron oversaw all of the data collection, which that's one of the unique factors on this project was how much data we collected. And my coworker Emily that went off and had a baby on us as well. I think we had 2 babies birthed throughout this project, if I recall correctly as well. So something that we can all kind of hang our hats on is to know that 2 babies were born as a result of this project too. And just the group of our steering committee, again, very active participation, not only from our community, but also from our steering committee. And I'm really pleased to share with you the journey and the path that this project took and just the level of engagement that we really saw. And I say active engagement, I think is really the key, and just how involved everyone was from all 3 parties, as well as the community and the participation that everyone had to really hear from the community. So I really want to acknowledge the same that happened on the mobility project. This one was slightly shorter schedule, but just how involved everyone was. So as we go to the next slide, the project overview, it started off with an existing conditions assessment, looking at all of the previous projects and assessments that have been done, talking to team members, talking to community members, looking at the inventory, and overall coming up with a needs assessment. That then fed into the stakeholder engagement part of the process, really understanding the priorities as it relates to parking specifically, and then the data collection project. And we'll obviously drill in on the data collection and really what we have now as a baseline of 1 year worth of data that we can use for future reference, recommendation on policies, and comparison and contrast as things move forward. Next slide. So the study area highlighted there in yellow, we tried to cover every single nook and cranny of Isla Vista, all of the streets in consideration of that. We also evaluated Goleta Beach also as a part of this process, and we'll dig in on the highlighted areas as we talk through this project. Next slide. So in terms of the existing conditions, this was important to consider not only the existing county codes, some of the legislation, including the daylighting, coastal access requirements and needs, the safe parking program. We really tried to look at this comprehensively. And again, I know some of this will come as no surprise to you and those in attendance, but we basically have little, if any, compliance with parking policies in Isla Vista. The reality is that we don't have effective parking enforcement. Those resources have been reallocated. It was very clearly shared from the sheriff's department that we've got to staff the jail, and basically all supplementary personnel have been redirected to those locations. And therefore, the reason why we don't really have those resources dedicated in Isla Vista. Therefore, we have heavy congestion and parking, very low turnover, illegal parking abound, including the red curbs, blocking the intersections and such. Long-term vehicle storage in excess of the 72 hours. We'll drill in on that. Double, if not triple parking in some cases, causing roadway obstructions. And really the list continues on. The impacts of pedestrian and cyclist safety concerns, which we obviously tackled in the mobility study, and the spillover basically demand from UCSB folks avoiding the need to pay on campus and parking and storing their vehicles in Isla Vista. Parking, vehicle habitation, limitations on coastal access, kind of a little bit of everything, as you all know, because really what I like to share is parking really does touch everything in Isla Vista, and that's something we really want to help change. So as we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the needs assessment. Basically, we looked at everything from on-campus housing, Goleta Beach, and both public on-street parking as well as private off-street parking. We'll talk a little bit about our utilization of the drone. And on the qualitative side, we also conducted an online survey. We made sure to keep that survey open and available basically throughout the entire fall quarter of last year so that we can make sure to get as many responses as possible. Our town hall meetings, we've had intercept surveys, we've tried to interview beachgoers because we really wanted to be comprehensive. I really have to give another shout out to IVCSD on this one because I conduct community meetings all across the country, and you guys get folks to respond and attend, and you serve them really great food, which is a real nice incentive. And just a sampling of some of the stakeholder meetings there on the right side, we tried to talk to everyone, anyone that would talk to us about parking, to share their concerns, to share their wants, to share their needs. We tried to talk to everyone, including bilingual translation services, to especially try to approach some of our Isla Vista families and community groups. I just really have to reinforce how extensive the outreach has been and how engaged the outreach has been as well. So as we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the online survey results. We had over 1,200 responses, and again, the survey stayed open for several months. And I think the findings, again, come as no surprise, just like the initial assessment. We have inconsistent parking enforcement, low compliance. Parking is the most challenging issue to find during the school year and during the evening. So we have occupancy impacts, very limited turnover, cars park and stay for long term without moving. We talked about paid parking as one of the survey responses, and most would rather find free parking further away than pay for convenient parking. Accessibility, difficult to find parking, especially near your home, but many rely on their cars to get to and from Isla Vista. Beach access, it's hard to find beach parking, and the safety concerns of the illegally parked cars, and also having to park further away from your home and walking greater distance, which leads to some of the lighting challenges that we shared earlier. And again, the mobility reinforcement of expanded bus services and more full service businesses in Isla Vista to encourage utilization of alternative mobility solutions. Next slide. So when we did the parking worksheet survey at our latest town hall meeting in May, specifically targeting parking, you can see that the 24 of the respondents basically identified compliance as their top priority, followed by safety and then congestion impacts and so forth. And so the top supported strategy, and I know some might be surprised to hear this, but you've got your community asking for compliance. And anyone that knows me knows I like to talk about compliance rather than enforcement because we want people to follow the rules. Parking tickets are inevitable, but if we can really focus on education and outreach, that's really where we know we can really start to move the needle. We know that safety was identified in the top priority list as well, and to be cognizant of pedestrian and cyclist safety programs, and to really work with UCSB on discouraging on-campus student residents from bringing their cars to campus. There's been a lot of conversation and dialogue from that, and also support and response from UCSB. Now we've got to make that happen. The need to incorporate more short-term parking, especially around the loop around our commercial businesses, and to consider an employee parking permit program because we do have some folks that actually do come in from outside of Isla Vista. And for those that are reliant on their car to navigate their job or jobs, we want to be sure that we have designated parking locations for them. And the big one that generated a lot of conversation and dialogue is the consideration of a street sweeping parking program in Isla Vista in order to ensure from an environmental impact perspective that we're thinking about the opportunity to be sure that we're sweeping our streets and to then formalize and regulate Camino Mallorca, this area, especially where that row of the eucalyptus trees are at the beginning of this project. I would have called that no man's land because there was a lack of accountability on how to manage those locations. And as we navigated this process, more and more dialogue was happened, including with surf riders. And so we want to be able to look at coastal access, but looking at ways potentially of getting the cars off the dirt and making sure that we don't have overnight storage of vehicles in those locations. Next slide. So when we think about the impacts to consider, again, this is kind of a day in everyone's life, but cars blocking driveways, cars parked at the end of our dead end roads, cars parked in the middle of the intersections, parked at the red curb, oversized vehicles, double parked vehicles, abandoned vehicles. These are all factors that we wanted to be cognizant of as we talk about how to solve for the parking management needs of Isla Vista. Next slide. So let's talk about data. I know I can sound like a broken record, but if there's anything that you all take away from this project, one of the things that I like everybody to know is 85% occupancy is the parking industry standard for when you're near or at capacity. And you can see by our averages for not only the spring quarter, but also the summer semester, you can look at the fact that we are in excess of 100% occupancy a good chunk of the time. And that is absolutely problematic because we counted all the cars, even those that were illegally parked, because we wanted to be realistic in our assessment. When we first started this project and launched the data collection project, which we did, leverage license plate recognition technology so that we could identify not only the car counts, but also how long the cars were staying. But one of the things we also did because of past studies, we also designated the parking space sizes that were utilized. Industry standard, basically a parking space standardly is between 24 to 22 feet. And we actually, because of the congestion and compactness and density of Isla Vista, we actually use the standards of 20-foot and 18-foot adjacent to a driveway. So you can see that if we took those measures out, the occupancy numbers would be even higher. So to demonstrate this, we took a very conservative approach. So as we took these recommendations outside of this community, i.e. approaching Coastal Commission, we wanted to make sure that we were very holistic in our approach towards this particular effort. On the right side, for those of you who've heard me speak about this before, summertime in Isla Vista continues to be my favorite time of year. And we were sitting having a sandwich on Pardal out at Sam's. And it was when I was chatting with my colleagues and sharing, gosh, how can we communicate to those that don't live or work here what it's like in Isla Vista? Because unless you've been here and have experienced it, how can you understand the density? And that was actually when we decided to bring out the drone. And so we wanted to utilize the drone because we wanted to be able to share a picture is worth 1,000 words. Oh, you're okay. Stay there. I'll come back to it. Yep. So but the drone was utilized, and you're going to see the images of that in a moment, because we wanted to be able to demonstrate the compactness, the density of Isla Vista. But as we scroll through for each quarter, if you'll go to the next slide now, thank you. You'll see that again, when, no surprise, school is in session, you can see that year-round capture where again, our density is in excess of that 85%. No surprise here is that we are in excess of the industry standards, and we need to start making parking management decisions, which leads to that want and need for compliance. Next slide. And so a couple of special exercises that we went through was we did some specialized studying throughout this 1 year of data collection, which included coming out and looking at the occupancy during the winter break. So we came out before everybody really kind of came back from the holidays. And you can actually see that the occupancy numbers being where they are with an average occupancy overall of 42%. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll actually see the information for our private off-street locations. This is something that we leverage the drones for, and you can see that we did the occupancy sampling at 5 p.m. on one weekday and at 7 a.m. on one weekend during our October data collection, so that we could demonstrate really where the density and the implications are. And again, you can see through the color coding, no surprise on some of the streets and where the density occurs. But this gives you kind of that visual representation of occupancy in our off-street private locations. One of the things that came out of several of our interviews and meetings, discussions, especially with some of our private property management companies and owners, was that when they bundle or unbundle parking, it obviously affects the usage of those locations. So when renters have to pay for parking, we're seeing that spillover on the street where they're basically able to park for free. So that's something that our hope is when we start to regulate on-street policies, that will push cars back into their property locations. And that's really when we can start to make next step recommendations. Once you start to seek compliance and see where the cars go or how much of a decrease in occupants we have, can determine what those next steps are. Next slide. So this is the example of the drone imagery. This is going to be really important when we do start talking to outside agencies, including Coastal Commission. We want them to understand, again, if you haven't been to Isla Vista, what the implications are. And using the example from earlier, they're using the sidewalks where we have them to store more vehicles. We know we have an issue of access to our trash dumpsters, factors like that. But this is where the imagery comes into play. Next slide. So the next one that was important from a specialized study, especially with the technology that we utilize, was looking at an evaluation of the 72-hour rule. I'm sure everyone is familiar, but if you're not, California Vehicle Code requires that you have to move your car every 72 hours or based on whatever the posted signage is. So I might have to move my car more frequently, but I can't leave it stored on street in California for more than 72 hours. So we actually adapted our study in August, October, and March to be able to go out and actually do the data collection so that we were able to stagger the dates and be able to collect for the full 72 hours. And you can actually see such a substantial portion of the cars are being used for long-term storage in Isla Vista. Just using that August sampling date, we had nearly 20% of the vehicle inventory for the parking spaces on street of cars that were stored for more than 72 hours. And our highest period of demand for on-street vehicle storage was in March, where we had almost 24% of the parking spaces were cars that were parked for more than 72 hours. These numbers are important because of the reality of the cars are not moving. And that's the whole purpose. If we're just bringing our cars to store them, we need to really do a mind shift and leverage some of those alternative mobility devices to really change behavior. Next slide. So now let's talk about the action plan. And it's important when we talk about the action plan and the ability to adopt the action plan is to recognize there is a lengthy list of opportunities and options. But what we like to share about the action plan is you may never have to get past this first page. This first page could probably solve for many years of moving forward, and you get to the crossroads to determine what happens next. But the one thing that is important and is really needed is an Isla Vista compliance program. And so we want to start enforcing the policies as posted, which is what I was just alluding to before. This is not about writing parking tickets. The reality is we want people to follow the rules so that we can truly affect and evaluate the curb and to see how much parking is needed in Isla Vista by managing the rules as posted. This means no other changes other than let's enforce the rules as posted consistently and making sure that we're out there having a major education and outreach campaign in support of this exercise. By collecting that information and continuing to collect parking utilization data, that's that metric to determine if we're starting to have an impact on utilization. We need to evaluate the options for how to manage Camino Mallorca, do a feasibility assessment, and working with our community and Surfrider so that we're again encouraging coastal access, but also being cognizant of the fact that we have other things happening on Camino Mallorca, including long-term vehicle storage, vehicle habitation issues that also are affecting the quality of life for our neighbors and residents that live in that area. Working with UCSB to discourage car ownership and not bringing your car to the area, and to coordinate with private property owners to mitigate impacts. This could include the consideration of car share programs on private property and looking to evaluate what folks are charging for parking to make sure that those that live in those locations have accessibility. And if folks have excess parking, yes, that can happen. Let's look at the opportunity to consider shared parking agreements so that we can try to get more cars off the street so that we can have those protected bike lanes and other things that we talked in the mobility plan. Also, the addition of space delineators near the driveways is something that can prove to be a costly solution to maintain, but having those hash marks on the ground also delineates to ensure safe ingress and egress into those driveways, because that's something, as we know, cars really start to infringe on that driveway line or spill over, impacting people's ability to get in and around. And I think, there we go, next slide. And so some of our other near-term strategies, after we really get through that first page, we really have to evaluate where we're going, what parking behaviors have changed, looking at our data. Once we have that consistent parking compliance program, then we can start to consider next steps. Many of you are familiar with the fact that I think it was almost 20 years ago, a residential permit parking program was approved by Coastal. It was never implemented, but the framework is there. It would still need to go before Coastal. But what I like to share with folks is all residential permits could be the answer. We really need to start with the compliance program, because what I like to demonstrate is that residential permit parking adds a whole nother slew of challenges, operational requirements, and a lot of details that go into the support of a program like that. Not to say that it's an impossibility, but the suggestion is starting on the previous page, and let's evaluate the impacts before we get to this particular slide. The opportunity to consider shared parking agreements, the consideration of certain blocks that basically don't have the width needed to be able to safely navigate a fire engine, the consideration of parking on one side of the block, or potentially even eliminating parking on both sides of the block in some cases. The consideration of the daylighting legislation that we mentioned in the mobility study, where you can't park within 20 feet of an intersection, and how we're going to deploy that. We also are recommending formalizing the special event parking management plan. There's a lot of unwritten policies that have existed for a long time on how we operate in Isla Vista when certain events come to play. We want that to be formalized because, again, if we all win the lottery and don't show up to work tomorrow, we want our predecessors to be able to have good guidelines and understand how these processes are supposed to work. And again, identifying opportunities to expand car sharing and looking at our private property owners to be able to help bring that as a solution, because as a result of the California legislation, don't forget, any new developments within a half a mile of a transit stop do not require parking. And so anything that we can do to motivate or incentivize private property owners in those developments to also bring car sharing into their solutioning will prove to be a benefit for the community as a whole. Next slide. So looking at a couple more near term was identifying a parking option outside of Isla Vista. This was something we heard frequently from folks is, gosh, just build a garage or find a big parking lot. I will send back to you where, because that was really part of the challenge. We tried to turn over every rock and look behind every curtain, and we couldn't find that magical parking location. But the reality of if something did pop up is it would need to be safe, accessible, and easy to access. And right now, obviously, with the wave coming, we have a big enough challenge trying to get to the Amtrak station. I don't know how viable an alternative outside of IV would work for the community. making sure that we're coordinating with the mobility study enhancements and really looking at our commercial core and ensuring that we can strengthen our policies to enhance access. This could include a no reparking ordinance in the time limited zones to prevent people from just moving from one space to another, juggling the current time limits, and also considering the operating hours, possibly starting earlier, since a lot of our businesses actually open earlier for the early morning breakfast crowd. So the consideration of that, employee parking permit program, as I mentioned, and then also like in the mobility study, the importance of an active loading and unloading zone for our commercial deliveries, as well as short-term parking for quick pickup and drop-offs. Something that was also important to the community was access to our parks, including a parking location for our park maintenance vehicles, but the ability for us to potentially install time limits around our park locations so that our community can actually access the parks as well was something to consider. Being prepared in the future for more electric vehicle charging stations and where to put those, and also the consideration of expanding our current safe parking program, especially as we start to talk about the enforcement of the policies as posted. We want to make sure that we have options for folks in need to have a safe parking location. Next slide. So a couple of the longer term strategies, again, as we progressively work our way through these processes, being able to move into these options, you have to have a solid foundation of parking management and effective, consistent enforcement for us to really even talk about any of these next options, one of which includes street sweeping parking regulations. The opportunity for us to coordinate with Goleta West Sanitary District to be able to have street sweeping in the community, not just during the holiday periods, but to actually ensure that our streets are kept and up maintained. And then also the opportunity for paid parking could be an opportunity in our loop in particular. Again, not a day one solution, but something that as we have that solid foundation of consistent and effective parking management, this could be a consideration. Any changes to parking management in the future, including the consideration of paid parking, would have to go to Coastal Commission. And then the other one was the consideration of a congestion pricing program. For anyone who's heard me speak about this in the past, Isla Vista is probably one of the few locations that is perfectly designed for a solution like this. Communities overseas have successfully implemented programs like this. It's almost like a tolling program, almost like an e-permit solution that would allow you to mitigate and minimize long-term storage of cars. And for those non-residents coming into the Isla Vista, they would actually have to pay an appropriate price to be able to park their cars. So it's very similar to a tolling program. And we'd have to obviously evaluate the legal feasibility. But as more tolling comes into play in the US, including California, as more automation is introduced, this could be a feasibility opportunity to look at in the future. Next slide. And so with that, I would just like to reinforce the project webpage has all of this information on this project. And I just have to really take a moment to again acknowledge the engagement on behalf of the community. I feel like I've developed friendships as a result because I've spoken to some of your community members so frequently. And IVCSD has just been so accommodating and really engaged in this process. This would not have been possible without staff. I cannot reinforce how well attended your events have been and how engaged your community has been. And that is the direct result of this group in its entirety and how well you promoted participation and engagement and provided every means possible to the community to stay engaged. So I also have to add one other thing because I just have the mic. I really have to just give a big kudos to Jonathan because it makes me very proud to know that you have someone like Jonathan out there representing Isla Vista and fighting for Isla Vista. And so for someone like myself who takes a lot of pride in Isla Vista, I really appreciate the board and the staff, but Jonathan, you've really made a difference. And I just thank you as an alumni for your contributions to the community as well. So With that, any questions?
All right, thank you, Ms. Dixon. Are there any questions from any board members at this time? Director Brandt.
I've got a question about some of the data that you collected. You showed the chart or the diagram of the community and the occupancy levels. And you showed one that was from the fall quarter and one that was from the spring quarter. I don't remember what page that slide was on, but the one from the spring quarter had a much lower, or not much lower, but lower availability. This is that's the summer.
This is spring, April.
That there's spring, and then I think that there might be one from fall. There we go. Yeah. So it seems like, you know, there's more available, like we understand why there's more availability during the summer. Why do you think there's more availability during the fall quarter compared to the spring winter?
Well, this is my theory. I have no proof of this. I want to be clear, but just from us studying and evaluating, as more folks become comfortable, both living on campus and off campus, they see that they can have the convenience of their car, and the reality of them being able to store it for the long term is why I think you start to see more cars being stored as the year progresses. So I might have started the year and said, oh, I shouldn't have my car there. I'm not going to need it. Or, you know, my family said I can't bring a car. But as I've gone home for the winter break, I can probably bring my car back. You know, I think it's one of those types of trends as you see it. And then also when you think about the enrollment factors of, you know, new students also coming in at different parts of the year as well. But I think a lot of it comes from the ease of being there your first quarter in the fall and figuring out that I can kind of have my car and nobody's really going to say or do anything about it. And by bringing it back from when you come back from your winter break and knowing that I could have my car as a convenience into that, you know, spring semester or spring quarter and into the end of the year. That's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers do go up from fall to the other quarters in their different academic years. And so it holds both.
Well, that makes me really optimistic, because that says to me that education alone may be worth 10%. And that's we're talking hundreds of spaces at that point. I had another question. We got a public comment about accessory dwelling units and the lack of parking standards. And you mentioned this in the existing conditions aspect of the report. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is, why that is? Is this a state law? Is this new regional planning?
Great question. So basically there's state legislation now in place that, and the simplest one to identify is that any development within a half a mile of a transit stop does not require parking. And a lot of these codes were initiated right before the pandemic. Some of them got approved during the pandemic. Because of the housing crisis in California, this is where the state is basically mandating that parking requirements be waived. Some states are waiving parking requirements in mass and whole. We have a couple of rules and restrictions associated with that. Like I said, the half mile within a transit stop, and honestly, everywhere in Isla Vista is within a half a mile of a transit stop. But agencies are being handed this requirement, and I can say this with all confidence. This is not the preference for Isla Vista necessarily from any of your planning departments and such, because we obviously know what the impacts are. But the reality is this is what the state law states. But this is where you all being proactive in your role, and the fact that we've been able to talk to some of the developers so that we can encourage them to be able to, again, be good community members of things that they can do, like if you're going to eliminate parking, the ability to put car share in your property. This is where being able to have recommended standards, but they can't be requirements, quite frankly, because technically they come in and build and not put any parking in. That's really how the policies are written. And same with ADUs, garage conversions. Right now, agencies are very much handcuffed at what they can require because of the fact that those parking requirements are now a thing of the past.
Thank you for explaining that. That the car sharing sounds really important to that.
For your community, yes.
All right, are there any other questions from board members at this time? I don't see any, so I'll go to the public for any public comments or questions or discussion.
Okay. Sue Dixon again. I think this is all really exciting. I can't wait for y'all to proceed implementing all this stuff. It's really good. I do have one extremely nitpicky thing, if you'll bear with me. I think the spell checker was at fault on page 2. I tried to read the whole thing, but life got in the way. So maybe you're lucky I only got to page 2. Anyway, page 2 of the existing conditions assessment, in the second paragraph, it says parking congestion in Isla Vista is exacerbated by the limited amount of parking enforcement resources. I would suggest that exasperation is a human reaction to something, and maybe the word you want is exacerbated. Yeah, that's it. Thank you to all of you for this.
Sue came to all the committee meetings.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Breezy.
We had one public comment on email that they asked us to read, which we do offer technically. So it's from Ian Stewart, who lives on 6870 Pasado. He says, "Good evening, board and attendees. Thank you for allowing me to share during public comment. My comments relate to the IV Parking Action Plan. My name is Ian Stewart. We are homeowners and residents of the 6-8 block on Posada Road. We have lived in Isla Vista for 8 years and are raising our young son in this wonderful community. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for the detailed parking survey work that you have done to find solutions to a neighborhood that is at capacity with parking. With that in mind, I would like to raise an issue that will have a considerable impact on parking throughout IV, the development of large-scale ADU projects. We have one of several planned by the same developer in our street, and according to the plans, it is proposed to be a 2-story, 1,000 square foot structure with 4 bedrooms. The ADU has the ability to house between 12 and 16 more students, all of whom we can assume have cars. Our street, like all others, is already at 98% capacity, if not more. There's no room for 12 to 16 more cars on Pasado, so I am not sure where they will park. I asked that there be community-wide pushback with CSD support on large-scale ADUs in light of the results of the parking study. Thank you."
All right, thank you for reading that with us. Are there any commenters on Zoom or raised hands on Zoom? I should ask.
No.
All right, we'll conclude the public comment period and come back to the board for any further board discussion and questions. Director Freeman.
Something I think is probably important to point out is I've been part of this process with parking since before the IVCSD existed. There were 83 subcommittees and everything. And for what it's worth, I think that we have a problem and we're looking in, we've got the right kind of data and we're looking at solutions. Makes sense. I want to be clear about that. I'm not almost bringing this up from the perspective of like, what is the right thing to do? I think there's another aspect I think we should at least like really stare at for a moment, which is that I think that there's the thing that we should do is probably going to be extremely unpopular among a large percentage, not a majority even. I think just a large percentage of Isla Vista. And when you look at even the survey results, there's a lot of the things on like parking enforcement were very split. There were a lot of people who said strong agree, and there were almost as many people who said strong disagree. Going through and saying that, okay, now this way that Isla Vista has operated for decades at this point is going to suddenly get overturned. While sure, we're not going to immediately ticket everybody, and we're going to have education programs and warnings and all sorts of things, we are still drastically changing the status quo in a way that at least when I was going and like talking to people wanted more parking. I can't give them more parking, but they didn't want more enforcement. They wanted more parking. They wanted a place to put their car, not to essentially be told that they shouldn't have a car. And so the process here of making parking less prevalent and more expensive in an attempt at improving the community is probably going to be an extremely, in contrast to anything we've so far done, unpopular move. Again, I'm not saying that even a majority of people are going to think it's unpopular. And I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. And I'm not even saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that I think we should be prepared for the idea that this is finally the kind of thing that might actually cause people to, oh, you're putting this compliance program in, now we dislike your agency, as opposed to before where there were people who were just like, oh, they weren't helping me. So.
Thanks for those comments. Director Brandt.
I appreciate that perspective, and I agree that anytime that we venture into the realm of being involved in compliance, we are doing grown-up government. I mean, and that this is a part of the evolution of our district as we continue to take on bigger challenges and try to solve bigger problems. So I fully expect that you are correct that there will be some in the community that are unhappy if they receive a ticket for non-compliance. I also know that a robust education will be a part of that before we even get to compliance. But my perspective is also that I remember sitting here with you and George Thurlow. George is going to get name checked twice. Our former director, George Thurlow, who, when we were talking about what services of the IVCSD should we prioritize working on in 2017, he said, if you touch parking, you're going to have a room full of people with pitchforks. And here we are today, and we don't have a room full of people with pitchforks. We got a great public comment about a spelling mistake. And that is really a testament to the fact that I think in a lot of ways, the outreach and work and education that you've done through this process, our staff and our consultants team have gotten the community to a place that's probably as close to consensus as we're going to get. And that to me is astonishing, a really hopeful way for our ability to try to get a handle on this problem. I think that from what Julie has told us before, being involved in implementing this in other communities, there are going to be growing pains, and that is normal. I think it's something that we should embrace because we know that these are challenges that people have been clamming for us to do something about since before we were created. There's a reason that parking is one of our powers, and there's not many other community services districts that have the authority and power to even undertake this. It's because, and it's written that way because this is a long-standing thing that the community has desired. So I think that this is a day for us to be hopeful, while also agreeing with you say, Director Breven, we should be aware that this is probably the most hopeful, and happy that we'll get to celebrate the great work that our team has done over the past number of years, and then the real work begins. The thing that I also think is really important, and the one thing about the plan that I think could be made better, is that I really appreciate that it has included things like electric vehicle charging, as well as prioritization for electric vehicles in some of the aspects of the plan. But I think that
that should be something that is prioritized and maybe not even a part of phase 2, but a part of phase 1, because there is funding imminently available. And most of the stuff that's in phase 1, we don't even have funding for yet, or we haven't identified it yet. We're working on it, but it's still a work in progress. So I would like to see that be a part of all of our work going forward as well. I understand it will take collaboration between us, between the county, between our funding sources. But to me, this is outside of the going back to convenience and wellness. The third is climate. And I think that is where the rubber meets the road here. We need to make sure that we are trying to incentivize the behaviors that we know are healthy for our climate and our planet, and not incentivizing the behaviors that aren't as much. So those are my thoughts, and just tremendous gratitude to everyone that has worked on this, especially to you, Director Freeman, Director Aguilar, for shepherding this through as the parking committee and having so many of these conversations. There had to have been hundreds, I'm sure, of these conversations. And, so I just really appreciate all your work.
Thanks for those comments. I want to respond a little bit or share a little bit about some of the experiences we had in the very initial stages of this parking journey, before we were fully a committee, when we were interviewing different folks who were interested in the community, as well as interviewing different consultants. And Director Desher was a part of this ad hoc. That's the peak moment that I remember experiencing pushback. And it was from one individual who isn't an Isla Vista resident. They just like coming here. And they were really annoyed that we would consider doing the study, that we would spend money on the study. And they were very much worried that they were going to have to pay to park in Isla Vista at any point in the future. And I was kind of expecting, okay, like we're going to get this kind of commentary from a lot of folks. And they haven't found us, or they haven't heard our message. So we haven't had more, but then that one pitchfork moment about 2 years ago. And that person hasn't returned today. They didn't send in a public comment, telling us to not take any actions. They didn't congratulate us either, but I am equally proud, as Director Brandt shared, that we've come this far, that we have a pretty strong consensus with community members who did participate in our engagement, that we have a problem. They want there to be some action on the problem. The action could be a little bit split, but they want there to be action. I want to hone in on a specific section of the action plan, which is 1C, evaluate options for Camino Mallorca. And that was probably my most personal driving point into parking being an issue, was that I lived in that neighborhood for about 8 years now. And I'm very proud to see that the photo for Figure 6 Camino Mallorca, I can see my own car there on the road, which I can explain is caused by the density of parking on the street that I was living on and the streets neighboring. I definitely didn't want the minor inconvenience of walking across the street to my house, but I had to in order to park legally. I think the only other close moment of pushback we experienced was when we talked with a Isla Vista resident who has been here for a couple of decades, I'm assuming, and she very specifically asked me and Director Freeman, "You don't park on Camino Mallorca, do you? You don't park in the dirt, do you?" And Jay answered that he does not, and I had to feign, well, sometimes I have to. And I was besmirched for parking on Camino Mallorca, and specifically in the dirt road. The reasons why it's important to me are very much environmental. That road, it's not marked, and also it slopes downhill. A lot of runoff goes straight into the ocean. On any kind of like rainy, stormy day, you just get tons of runoff. And in this photo, we can see that there's a car with tons of camping materials there on the ground, and possibly other things that we don't want on the ground. And I've seen that space really becomes antithetical to Isla Vista's values about respecting nature and respecting the environment around you. The environmental movement, basically originated here with young people educated by this university. And then to see that this boundary to me is the frontier of the UC taking care of a natural space, and we let it get stomped on, trampled on, littered on. Cars park on it, they leak. My own car, probably leaks something. So I'm equally as, implicated, but it's just, it's not a good sign to me and my values and what I've learned from Isla Vista about respecting nature. And so I really want to hone in that I'm glad that this made its way into the report and has actions, and we can look into formalizing that. I know it might not happen soon, but that's a personal point of pride of mine, is that we're gonna hopefully address Camino Mallorca in the next couple of decades. I'm not gonna rush anyone, but I'll be coming back in public comment just to check in on Camino Mallorca and what's happening. So I'm really thankful that we've got to this point in the process. I'm really thankful that we've had so much community engagement, so much so that folks don't feel like they have to be here in mass to tell us how wrong we are or how right we are. They just trust us. I feel so proud of our district for that trust that we've been given from the community. And that's thankful to our staff and thankful to our consultant for going out and engaging with the community. So I'm really proud to be at this moment. It feels kind of anticlimactic, but I think that's a success. And anyone else can have the last word. I don't have to have the last word on things.
I think that was a good last word.
I think you should make the motion.
All right. I'll make probably my first motion ever. I would move to adopt the Isla Vista Parking Action Plan.
I will second.
All right. So I made the motion, and we have the second from Director Freeman. Is there any public comment on this motion? I see none, so I will ask for a vote. All those who are in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no. And this motion passes 6-0-0-1.
I just have to give Julie a shout out. She started her career on parking in IV and got us to this point. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity, and we're not done yet. I'll just say that much. So thank you guys very much. And it's just been a really great project and just so collaborative. I wish all of our projects went like this, but it was also a very personal approach. So I just really appreciate your tolerance and the passion that went into this as well.
Thank you. I also want to thank the Dixon team, and specifically Julie, for the numerous times that you went above and beyond what we had asked or what we were expecting to ask. And we wouldn't have to ask because you had enthusiasm to help serve Isla Vista. So I'm really thankful for that. And the community needs to know that that's how far above and beyond you went for us the whole time. So thank you for that.
That means a lot. And I'll relay that. I'm going to see Emily tomorrow, so I'll let her know I get to go meet the new baby, which I think she should have named Ivy or something, but we'll definitely share that. And again, Chisa and Jennifer, it wouldn't have been possible without the entire team. I'll be sure to relay those comments, but I am personally very proud to be a part of this, and I'm really excited to see how this moves forward. So we really appreciate the opportunity, and you all know where to call. We're always happy to help. So.
Thank you.
I'll give one more shout out.
Yes.
Maya had to get thrown in to the deep end to do the outreach for this. Midway, right at the beginning, unexpectedly. So, and we did get all that good response, like has been mentioned. So that wasn't her. She had an interim job to get that done. Really, we did get it done at that point. So. And Leslie, who was our parking outreach intern. So yeah, lots of people involved in this. We did it. This part.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our discussion and action items. And now we will move on to our reports, section 5. We have 5.1, reports from members of the board. Are there any board members who wish to share a report? Director Bray.
I had a chance to participate in the UCSB Associate Students EVPLA's town hall about Halloween. It was a good discussion about a variety of things relating to their priorities, which include restorative justice and the success of that program. And I also got to talk about our Isla Vista interpersonal violence investigation program and how important that is given some of the preliminary statistics we've seen about increased reporting of sexual violence. So I just want to, I very much value our partnership with Associated Students.
Thank you for that report. I'll share a brief report, just a reminder of folks about Goleta Library and the coming change in services. I gave more detailed report at our last regular meeting, but the City Council of Goleta will be reviewing the options for interim service at their November 19th meeting. If you want, I can share with folks the past Goleta Library Advisory Commission agenda, which goes over the 3 most likely plans. Most of them, I'm pretty sure all 3 of them are maintaining the same level of service in Isla Vista via the library book van, which is a good thing. But if you want to have more in-depth information, just ask me and I will forward those materials. Hopefully our ad hoc, if folks also have questions, can just let me know, or comments, let me know, and then we can work on that and make sure that we have a comment or a stance to share with the City Council of Goleta. Seeing no further board members' reports, I'll ask if there's any reports from standing or ad hoc committees.
Policy committees next week. So
It hasn't happened since the last.
Yeah.
All right, and item 5.3, is there a report from District Council?
Hello, nothing to report.
All right, thank you. And item 5.4, report from our general manager and staff.
I don't have a lot to report. A lot of the time, the last couple of weeks was finalizing these reports. So, we went through several last rounds of revisions on them. All important, I think. So they came out. A couple other things is me and Spencer had a chance to go talk to a class. We actually talked to so many different classes in the last couple of weeks about, parking and mobility were actually the #1 topics, but we talked about other things too. We also had a few meetings about Halloween and starting to plan for the future. So Halloween's over, but there were a couple meetings in the last week where we met with like IVCSD, for example, to start thinking about, taking into account what we've already done and planning for the next steps and having like a game plan more. And that's what we've been talking about already too. So that was good to know that our UCSB partners are on the same side as that. And just as one thing to know is our project manager employees hit all their 1-year anniversaries of the district this last month. So they got their evaluations done. So that's another milestone for them. Yeah, besides that, we definitely were getting these reports finished for today. And that was the focus the last 2 weeks.
I'll just add super quick. We hired 2 fantastic interns, a data intern and a government admin intern. And then if I could ask all of you to also share out the housing mediator and legal advisor RFP out. It's on our website. You'll get a reminder email tomorrow, so just forward it out. And just a quick update on our vending machine for the last month that it's been open. The majority of things that have been required from the community, 21 emergency contraceptives, 16 Narcan, 9 fentanyl test strips, 7 safe syringe kits, 3 xylazine test strips, which for anyone that doesn't know what xylazine is, I did not. It's animal tranquilizer that is often found in adjacent to fentanyl in substances, 2 STI test kits, and 1 rapid HIV test kit.
Awesome. That's in a month.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, Director Freeman. I'm sorry, did you say that it's an animal tranquilizer test kit, or is it animal tranquilizer? We actually have.
Xylazine.
We actually Oh, the test, okay, all right, okay.
Yeah.
Stop that we
Xylazine
have
is a-
animal
I
tranquilizer
didn't know
in
what
the.
xylazine
I looked that up too, actually.
was.
I took a
Yeah.
picture, I asked the sheriff,
Yeah.
then I had to look it up.
My level of confusion wasn't what it was. I mean, I didn't know what it was until she said, but my level of confusion was whether was it you saying that we just have xylazine in the vending machine? Like, why are we vending them? Test.
Yeah.
I was like, what is xylazine? Why are we testing for this? And yes, very exciting.
And how would you know to test for it?
It's in fentanyl.
Yeah, but how would you know to use Narcan?
You don't.
Okay,
Yeah.
you don't. Okay, that's my,
Yeah,
that's my
It's not
question.
responsive to Narcan. That's the problem.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Wow.
In general, I'm really proud of that vending machine. I've definitely been bragging about it with Isla Vista alumni, folks who used to live here, who don't, and I've heard a couple of stories that sounded scary from a different time period in which, oh, I had to drive to the east side to go to a different, Santa Barbara City Park to look for one of these vending machines. And folks who are just really happy that we have this now in Isla Vista for the current generation on forward. So it's even better to hear that, these resources are being used. So thank you for that update. Now we can move into our 6th area closed session. There's no one here with us. Council, could you read us into closed session?
Yes. So there are 2 items on the agenda tonight for closed session. Item 6.1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Sections 54954.5C and 54956.9D1. Case name is 238 Serrano Properties LLC et al. Versus the State of California et al. LA County Superior Court case number 24 STCV 01214. And the second item is item 6.2, general manager evaluation pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B1.
All right, thank you.
Put the Zoom where that was. in. All right, we're good.
No.
Okay, council, could you please read us out of closed session?
Yes, so the board met in closed session under item number 1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to government code sections 54954.5C and 54956.9D1. Case name 238 Serrano Properties LLC et al. Versus the State of California et al. Los Angeles County Superior Court case number 24 STCV 01214. Discussion on this matter was had, no reportable action taken. The second item was the general manager evaluation under Government Code Section 54957B1. Discussion was had and direction was provided to staff, no reportable action taken. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to our 7th area, future meeting dates and future agenda items. The next regular meeting of the Board of Directors will take place on December 3rd, 2024 at 6 p.m. on Zoom and at the Community Room 970 Embarcadero Del Mar, Isla Vista, California. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting.
Cool. Thank you.
Good job.
Oh, well, I'm never gonna get this.